Now, if you ask anyone who knows me, they'll tell you that I'm an open-hearted, endlessly forgiving man of peace. I'm literally pathologically nice. So let's just put a strike through the idea that I'm doing this video to foster divisions. I don't want to foster divisions. We are already beset with divisions. We have Brexiteers versus Remainers. We have the coastal elites versus the Bible Belt. We have people with jobs versus white people with dreadlocks. I'm all in favour of unity. However, like watching a man in a ski mask stroll into NatWest, sometimes you have to point out that something is wrong. Which brings me to the generational question, or rather, the Gen X question. Let's start by looking at millennials. Now, millennials are generally seen as the generation born between 1981 to 1999. This is, of course, all open to interpretation, but a good rule of thumb is that you're a millennial if you're able to remember 9/11. The generation after, Generation Z, were either toddlers, babies, or just not even born at the time. Older millennials like me would have been 19 or 20 round about the time of 9/11. We would be in the middle of university maybe, or we'd be taking our first steps into the big wide world. We'd be perhaps getting that first job, and we were about 2 years away from starting the career of the libertines. And given a Western atrocity like that, it's hard not to see 9/11 as a fully justified preemptive strike. Generation X, on the other hand, were roughly born between 1960 to 1979. Their hobbies included wearing plaid, listening to Soundgarden, and pretending that Bill Hicks had more than 5 minutes of decent material. The older members of Generation X are now in their 50s, and they're not handling it well. They're getting very depressed about getting old. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. We all get depressed about the thought of getting old. No one enjoys it, but it's a part of life. No one likes looking in the mirror every morning to see more lines on your face, but you have to deal with it. Getting old might suck balls like a broken lottery machine, but it's a part of nature. Instead of settling into their aging gracefully, however, Generation X has been kicking out for a while now in frustration at the generation below them, the millennials. Now, throughout history, there's been a pattern. Every generation has always seen the generation below it as outrageous, as rebellious, as out of control, as edgy, dangerous, a threat to the system. Never ones to give up their individuality, though. Generation X are different, and like a dog wearing sunglasses, they're spitting in the face of nature. They've broken the established order. Generation X, or in particular the media commentators who act as the foaming mouthpiece of Generation X, don't see millennials as outrageous or edgy or rebellious or a threat to the system. Instead, Generation X still sees themselves as edgy, rebellious, creative, free thinkers. If you ask Generation X what they think of millennials, they'll tell you that millennials are hyper-emotional, easily triggered grown children. Kind of ironic when you think that their generational icon was a whining crybaby who had a shotgun for breakfast. Now, this isn't to say that this critique of millennials isn't entirely invalid. Some millennials can indeed get needlessly, screechingly emotional about shit that doesn't really matter. In fact, you could say that one of the greatest millennial sins is that an entire media infrastructure has been built up around this. Day after day we see clickbaity, manufactured outrage, all designed to sell advertising revenue, yet also under the guise of starting a valuable conversation. And it's hard to deny there's a certain satisfaction when the ever-loving hand of the free market gives one of these media outlets the punishment it deserves. The trouble is, this army of whiners are a very small fraction of millennials. Yes, they're annoyingly vocal, and yes, their constant tirades about meaningless bullshit like gender diversity in Game of Thrones is annoying. But overall, I would dare to say that outside of this bubble of professional problem inventors, millennials are a pretty well-adjusted bunch. A hell of a lot of millennials are genuinely involved and engaged in activism and social issues. All you have to do for proof of this is take a look at the recent Extinction Rebellion protests. Now, no one's saying these protests were perfect, and yes, some elements of these protests should have ditched their private jets at Hypocrisy International Airport.
Actor Emma Thompson pinning her colours to the mast, though she did leave a 3-ton carbon footprint just to jet in from Los Angeles.
Unfortunately, sometimes I have to fly, but I don't fly nearly as much as I did because of my carbon footprint, and I plant a lot of trees.
But overall, this shows a generation willing to get engaged, emotional, and passionate about issues that matter. So surely Generation X can tell the difference between the whiny crocodile tears of the clickbait squad and the millennials who actually care about things. The sad thing is, no, they can't. So why is this? Well, what we have to remember is that Generation X, more than any other generation perhaps, was brought up in a period of studied nihilism. When Generation X came of age, it was cool not to care about anything. This entire demographic has modelled themselves on Ethan Hawke in Reality Bites, and 25 years later, they're not going to give up on that dream. So with this studied, poised indifference, it's easy to see why Generation X get confused by millennial passions. The idea of someone getting genuinely invested or engaged in something sends Generation X into a confused spiral, a big shit fit like those monkeys at the start of 2001. So overall, Gen X are pretty shitty. But, as I said earlier, millennials can be shitty too. So what's the difference? The difference is this: millennials had their shittiness imposed on them. Millennials came of age at the arse end of neoliberalism. They were making their tentative steps into the workplace when a global economic crisis decimated everything. Millennials did everything they were told to do and they got nothing for it. Millennials were told they could be whatever they wanted to be, and instead they ended up in a parking lot knife fight for the last 3 jobs at an Amazon warehouse. If you take all this on board, I think it's quite easy to understand why millennials can be a bit touchy at times. Generation X, however, it seems, actively chose to be shitty. They came of age in a period of relative prosperity and opportunity, and instead chose to piss it all away. The most staggering thing is that they were crap even at this. If we look at end-of-the-century movies like American Beauty and Fight Club, it's clear that Gen X saw things like having a mortgage, a car and a job as repressive and stifling. Who would have guessed that to the next generation these things would be mere pipe dreams? When Jarvis Cocker sang about common people, he said, buy a flat above a shop. Nowadays, if you can buy a flat above a shop, you might as well be little Lord fucking Fauntleroy. I wanna live like common people. But, like I said at the very start of this, I'm a nice guy and I don't want to foster divisions. So what I'm interested in is this: how do we reunite these generations? How do we stop squabbling with each other? Well, the answer is simple. We can unite in hatred of the generation who screwed everything up, the boomers. Pretty much every gateway to spiraling social inequality was thrown open by these Viagra-blooded demons over the course of the past 70 years. And their legacy isn't going to be a good one. Generation X has never been keen on the boomers, millennials have been pretty angry about the boomers, and Generation Z are furious about the boomers. Angrier members of Generation Z have even taken to creating memes online to voice their displeasure. There's the classic shut the fuck up boomer, and of course there's the day of the pillow, a reference to the day when we'll all rise up and suffocate the boomers in their retirement homes. Now, to hammer that point home again, I'm a nice guy and I don't want to see anyone get hurt. However, I do think it's time that we sent boomers a message. I do think we need to target the things they hold dear. Personally, I dream of a world in which every village has a bonfire of Sting CDs and prostate medication. But it's never going to happen. To indulge in vast societal change, you need motivation, you need resources, you need money. The boomers have left us with none of these. The boomers saw their retirement coming and they grubbily gathered everything together that they could. They're the generational equivalent of one of those people of hoarders who shits in plastic bags and keeps it in the freezer.
Oh my gosh!
Anyway, I've wandered away from my main point here, which is Generation X and their mockery of millennials. I wish I had the optimism to say that this societal attitude might shift soon, but I really don't think it will. For a good while yet, Generation X will still be the ones in charge. The trouble is, if we live in a cultural landscape where triggering the millennials is seen as the highest form of discourse, we're going to end up in a world in which every media personality looks like this. Is that really the future you want for your children? Black hole sun, won't you come?